Story 1. It is not about banning children from social media. It is about getting adults to give up their privacy on the internet. Presenting the issue as a campaign to ban children is a tactic to make people surrender their privacy without realizing it. Story 2. I don't think you can effectively enforce something like that. Story 3. Sorry, I cannot assist with content that sexualizes minors. I remember encountering adult content online and clicking yes on the age confirmation prompt. The intentions behind age restrictions are good because social media is unhealthy, especially for teenagers and younger people, but those who want to access it will find a way. Many respondents do not realize that to make age verification work properly, you need the cooperation of social media platforms. Platforms cannot verify every profile's claimed age or reliably determine a user's true age. Unless social security numbers are linked to social media accounts, progress is unlikely. Story 4. I think 99% of commenters in the United States do not realize the hypothetical includes providing identification to social media companies to have an account. Story 5. That sounds like a great idea. It will probably be very difficult to enforce, but I like the concept. I hope Reddit is included in that ban. Story 6. Banning children under 16 from social media is like putting a fence around a playground. It may protect them from some harm, but they will find creative ways to push through, developing secrecy and rebellious skills. The real solution is teaching them to connect meaningfully in a world increasingly shaped by digital fiction. Instead of prohibition, let us empower them to navigate the complexities of both online and offline life with awareness and integrity. It is about handing them the map, not robbing them of the journey. Story 7. Consider this. The government refused to stop showing gambling advertisements during live sport, but claimed it was to protect children. I do not believe them. It is a surveillance bill. Story 8. It is a nice concept, but children far exceed our ability to thwart technology. Close the door and they will go out the window. Put up a fence and they will build a ladder. It may curb some use, but I doubt it will make much of a dent. Best of luck, though. Childhood is difficult enough. I grew up without a proper childhood, and it was still awful. Story 9. I think we are going to learn that this is really just a poor policy for everyone. How are they planning to implement it without making it difficult for everybody to get online instead of just teenagers? Using identification documents seems like a massive breach of privacy, but if identification is not required, children can simply enter a fake age. What is even the point of this? Story 10. As someone who made some of their closest friends online, I find it a terrifying thought. No, social media was not a thing when I was 16, but I stayed in touch with in-real-life friends via MSN Messenger and met new friends on forums. Denying me that would have isolated me even more than I already was. From a more objective point of view, it is still a terrible idea in so many ways. 1. Giving your identification to entities that have a horrendous track record with privacy and data safety. 2. Cutting off lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer teens and children in abusive households from support networks. 3. Shifting all responsibility away from parents by making access illegal instead of requiring parents to engage with their children. 4. Social networks are how children communicate, especially in a world with fewer and fewer third places where in-person communication can happen. 5. Intrusive laws that reduce liberties and privacy always start with something to protect the kids. A legal framework to restrict access to internet services based on age could very easily be modified to restrict access to file sharing sites, pornography, outlets of dissidence, unwelcome news sites, or commercial platforms from unfriendly countries. This entire law is absolutely horrifying. The only thing more horrifying is how many Australians apparently support it. Every comment cheering this on illustrates the boomerification of millennials I have been observing for a while. Our parents' generation got hysterical over violent movies, video games, or metal music, and those were idiotic moral panics. Yet our blanket, destructive solution to a problem affecting young people is presented as based on facts and logic. It is not. It is the exact same knee-jerk reaction our parents had. Story 11. It's dumb. Anyone who thinks it's a good thing is a fan of censorship, has a virtue-signaling attitude, and is full of hubris. This is an incredible overreach by the government. Story 12. This proposed action is oppressive. Governments should not interfere in people's private lives. The internet and social media are fundamental to modern society and will remain so. Trying to shelter children from them is impractical and would be difficult to track and enforce. It is better to teach people how to use social media safely rather than bar them and pretend it is still the 1980s. Teach people to handle situations maturely. Avoid helicopter parenting with strict bans, which hinders learning and development. Growing up involves exploring and experiencing both positive and negative events, including online. Digital literacy, communication, and networking are essential skills. People focus too much on arguments framed as being for children and ignore the implications. This is a form of government censorship that intrudes on people's lives and sets a dangerous precedent for legal control of the internet. It violates the ideal of freedom from political interference online. Where does it stop? Will more laws follow? Will other countries adopt similar measures? This is dangerous and must be addressed before it escalates. Story 13. It is bad. It sounds like they are trying to lay the groundwork for destroying privacy and anonymity online. Think of the children. Now papers, please. Story 14. A backdoor method for compulsory digital identification for everyone. A nasty big brother move. Story 15. It was stupid and rushed. Australia spent a few years building something like a firewall to prevent piracy, and it was broken in a few hours. This ban will achieve nothing but a sudden flurry of sign-ups by 17-year-olds. Story 16. The way of enforcing this ban is to make every person in Australia give their identification and private information to the government. This is not about protecting children. It is about surveillance. It also puts every Australian's private information at risk because of how incompetent the Australian government, and frankly most governments, are at handling technology-related issues. See Optus breach. Banning children from the internet does not keep them safe. The vast majority of child abuse and exploitation occur in in-person communities, by family, teachers, neighbors, and others, and cutting off the internet to young people removes vital, life-saving resources and information. As someone who would very likely have died without access to the internet as a child, this is a nightmare for the children of Australia and everyone else. Please think for 5 seconds before saying social media is bad for kids so governments should ban it. I am not saying there are not issues with the internet or with how children use it, but government surveillance and bans are not the answer. Story 17. I am skeptical. I do not know about the prevalence of family bloggers there, but when the parents are the ones exploiting the children, I do not feel that it would help much. Story 18. It will continue to place the burden of protecting and supporting children on institutions that will struggle to do so, while placing no responsibility on a social media economy that incentivizes harm. Story 19. As someone who was raised by the internet, YouTube, and forums in a positive way, I do not think that is the right approach. If I had not had the open, loving, and accepting online community, as a gay man born in rural Austria, I could have become a very bitter person. Story 20. Reducing children's ability to learn technology and isolating them from others is harmful. Arguing that children should spend more time outdoors does not justify removing their online access. Forcing people to verify their identity to create any social account means people of all ages must hand over sensitive documents, increasing the risk of identity theft or being traced. This is a draconian government action that does not benefit us. This should be a choice made by parents. There are nearly unlimited ways for parents to restrict what their children can do on devices through parental controls. Parents can block apps entirely or limit usage to a set number of hours at specific times. Those controls are available in software, and parents can also physically restrict a child's access. What about children who are struggling? Many teens suffer from high levels of depression. How are they meant to reach out and find like-minded people to socialize with, especially if they have interests that could lead to bullying or judgment from people they know, such as anime, games, science, history, fantasy, or other niche topics that do not go over well at school? How are they meant to express their interests and creativity to a wider audience? Many interests can harm a young person's social standing at school. They are missing opportunities to build careers from their passions. Artists, programmers, writers, musicians, How can they get there? Work out without access to platforms at a time in life when they have more time to be creative and productive than they may later? This period in their lives is the best opportunity to find an audience and make their name and work known, which is much harder without social media. Tying online identity to real identity also causes problems for adults. You may be bullied or tracked down in real life if you have any online presence and express opinions that later become controversial. All it takes is one leak or hack from a site that knows your identity. There are countless reasons this is a bad idea. It sets back young people, reduces our competitiveness in technology, removes privacy, undermines parental control, is likely to increase depression, and makes it harder for young people to find support when they need it. This policy does not benefit children or parents. Story 21. Bad idea because the only way to ensure children do not access the site is to require identification, and I refuse to provide it to any site. Story 22. I'm astonished at how many people think this is a good idea. This bill is about censorship and preventing people under 16 from accessing or viewing any form of media that is not provided by the school system or government news, that is, sources prone to indoctrination. The Australian government claims it is about protecting children, but most Australians see that as a disguise and a lie. For example, the bill would require social media platforms with potential educational value to be banned for users under 16, while actually harmful sites such as Pornhub are not affected. The bill would require everyone in Australia, including tourists, to have a form of digital identification to access social media platforms such as Facebook and similar sites. In short, the government would have access to this identification and could monitor people everywhere, which shows the bill is about control. Most Australians oppose this bill and view it as a power grab. It was rushed through Parliament so quickly that there was virtually no debate, which again shows the government wants to limit counterarguments so people do not realize how harmful it is. This bill will go down as a failure and will be remembered as another attempt by the government to censor and monitor citizens and to restrict freedom of speech. Right now, Australia has poor leadership in Parliament. Both the government and the opposition are weak and do not have Australians' interests at heart. Many people fear for the country's future because only a few independents who care do not have enough power to make a major difference. Those who support this bill are either ill-informed about its consequences or want to censor and monitor citizens. It is a direct attack on Australians' freedom of speech. Whether you agree or not is irrelevant. The effects of this bill will reveal the truth. When everyday Australians, not just those under 16, are significantly affected by this bill, I hope supporters finally see how truly harmful it is. Story 23. I think the last thing young people need right now is to be more isolated. They will also find a way around it, and good for them. Story 24. I do not need the government to police what my children do online. I can manage that with router and browser settings per device, blocking access to explicit pornography and social media. I can say no and ignore a child's whining. I can monitor their messaging, especially after giving advance warning that swearing in a group chat with grandma was a dumb idea last time and will cost them device access if it happens again. I do not want to upload my identification everywhere, or my children's identification. I am sure this is also about reducing the use of social media for news. Large news organizations do not want Facebook competing. There was nowhere near enough consultation on this ill-considered idea. I do not want this to affect Discord. My children use Discord specifically and only for game-time voice chat with the family. It is my job to enforce household rules and to decide that they can watch Terminator even if they are not old enough. It is my privilege to get this wrong, be in trouble with my wife, spend a week helping my child no longer be afraid of robots, and then enjoy how much they love Terminator 2 afterward. I did not need age verification from the government for that either. Story 25. Social media is toxic in several ways, but I am generally opposed to the government telling people how to parent. It would be more productive for the government to require that social media companies provide new and improved parental controls for accounts if they wish to operate freely in Australia. Story 26. This is not good. Many marginalized young people, such as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, asexual, and other children, and children with disabilities, connect via social media and can find the community they lack in their everyday lives. There are also examples of people who show that it is possible to live life as a gay or transgender person and still have a fulfilling life. Seeing that others can grow up, be themselves, and find meaning may be a lifeline for a transgender child living in a deeply conservative state. Young people may connect with others, find resources, advocacy groups, and reliable information about books and similar materials. As someone who found community online when I was older than 16 and who credits that with helping to save my life, I see the value for younger people. It can be a positive force for children who are disabled or who are queer. I am both disabled and queer. Cutting off access for those under 16 goes too far. Age 13 has been the minimum in the United States, for instance, and there are many parental controls available. Parental choice should apply, not a blanket ban on access. Story 27. Performative nonsense. Almost impossible to enforce, so it is likely to be useless, expensive, and ineffective. Story 28. I am sure it will control access to online content for children about as well as the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act of 1998 did. Story 29. Some people would say, haha, serves you right. Kids would be shocked to have to provide more personal information to continue using social media. Story 30. That sounds like a terrible idea, not because I disagree with it, but because I think they should focus on regulating all the misleading content on social media itself. It is alarming that Facebook can harvest personal information, spread disinformation, sell that information to the highest bidder, and promote scams as advertisements. Story 31. Okay, as much as this may seem like a good idea on the surface, it's not. It raises a lot of questions. How do they plan on enforcing this? Do they intend to enforce it with increased technological surveillance? And is that justifiable in this case? Given the many ways social media can be used for good and as a means of communication among teenagers, would banning it remove some of their autonomy? I would understand if this bill were directed toward children under 10 or 12, but this seems to have been made by older adults who do not understand the social politics of Generation Z. Story 32. I feel that it should be up to parents to protect their children from the dangers of social media. While I understand that there is a lot of material on social media that children should not be watching, I believe that this takes away from the benefits of social media, such as communication with friends, learning new skills, and skill development in a world where technology use is continually increasing. It also endangers free speech. Story 33. I like the idea, but I see many posts from young women asking for help with issues they are too scared to discuss with family and friends. I worry where they will turn. As a side note, my hairdresser, with whom I had been discussing this, drew my attention to a lesser-known bill that passed at the same time. Under the Misinformation Act, people can be tracked and charged for posts made on social media. Be careful. Story 34. Good luck. Isn't pornography banned for children under 18? How is that working out? Story 35. Seed, paint, jellyfish, nutty, racial, cats, close, pen, future, paltry. Story 36. It's like banning candy before dinner. Good intentions, but let's see how well it works without a full-blown rebellion. Story 37. Sounds like a think of the children moment. Absolutely a stupid law for shitty parents. Story 38. It is unenforceable. Like everything else, social media is okay in moderation. Maybe that is what should be taught to children rather than a nanny state response. Story 39. My 14-year-old daughter uses Facebook Messenger to receive work shifts through a workplace group chat. I do not know whether the application is separate, but because it is tied to Facebook, I assume the services will not work independently. Story 40. Reddit will lose all value. I am convinced 97% of users on this site are Australian children under 16. Story 41. The real motivation is probably a backdoor way to start requiring identification to use the internet. It's a slippery slope. I don't like it. Story 42. I don't think that deciding what kids may or may not do online is a legitimate role of government. Story 43. As an Australian, I oppose it. The decisions about which companies are affected are arbitrary. Snapchat is banned, yet WhatsApp and YouTube remain accessible. The government is also allowing those companies to decide how to enforce the rules, meaning Facebook could ask for government-issued identification, while Twitter might simply require a checkbox. Am frustrated at being told to potentially provide identification to companies with records of selling personal information. Experts gave evidence at Senate hearings and an overwhelming majority opposed the bill, yet it still passed. It is poorly handled, and it is surprising to see so many non-Australians in this thread supporting a reform they do not understand. Story 44. It depends what is meant by social media. There are online communities that are a lifeline for children in abusive homes or who are otherwise vulnerable. Story 45. Our government has pushed through legislation that we the people have voiced severe concerns about. They gave us little opportunity to oppose the change and ignored the concerns raised. The two major parties colluded to get the legislation passed as quickly and quietly as possible, which is always a bad sign. It will be harmful for all Australians of any age who need to access the internet. I understand why the world views Australia as a nanny state. The people supporting the change are short-sighted and lack critical thinking skills. I am appalled. Story 46. A great idea on paper. Then it gets implemented and you realize how bad an idea it is. The biggest problem is privacy and security. It is no secret that there are many hackers on the internet, and one of their most profitable ways to make money is by stealing personal data. The system is supposed to work by requiring you to provide some form of identification, for example, a driving license, passport, or credit card, to access a social media site. The problem is that the servers required to store and verify identification will be vulnerable to hackers. It will only be a matter of time before a single vulnerability allows the entire system to be compromised. This could have very serious consequences for people over 16. Their name, identification, email address, home address, bank accounts, tax file number, and many other details could be exposed if hackers break in. This would make it much easier to be doxxed and to be falsely accused of crimes. Many politicians do not seem to understand this, likely because they grew up before the internet existed. To them, the internet remains unfamiliar. Some people will simply use virtual private networks or proxies instead, especially the more tech-savvy, since those options are less risky than giving out personal identification. The government also cannot ban virtual private networks outright, because many businesses require them for security. The government might backtrack and repeal the law if it causes serious damage to the economy and society. Much of this stems from poor parenting. Thanks to technology, many parents seem to have forgotten how to parent properly and have relied on tablet computers and smartphones to occupy their children, which has contributed to the problem. Parents, not the government, should regulate what their children can and cannot see online. Story 47. People who think this is good fail to see the broader scope of the situation. Perhaps parents could actually parent their children instead of being passive bystanders. Teach them about the dangers of social media the way you teach them about dangerous wildlife or roads, for God's sake. Story 48. The bill is only popular with millennials who would rather have the government parent their children than do it themselves. I think this will go one of two ways. Either it will be a case of, do you pinky swear you are over 16? With no meaningful enforcement behind it, exactly as has been the case already for under 13s, or we will all be required to hand over our government identification to social media companies. We have no faith that they will protect our data and keep it secure. Our privacy laws are inadequate. Government identification is supposedly excluded for now, so it is unclear how they will actually verify age. It is up to individual social media companies to determine how they will comply. Many will probably refuse to comply with Australian requirements. The government gave the public one day to submit feedback on the bill, which was overwhelmingly against it, and then ignored that feedback. They had already decided to proceed. They rushed the bill through Parliament after delaying for months on the housing crisis, saying it was too hard. They will not pass a law to stop gambling advertisements during live sports and have done nothing about poker machines. If the measures were truly about protecting children, they would have implemented meaningful action, but they have not. When One Nation and the Australian Greens agree with each other, there is a problem. We complain about being a nanny state, but this bill is proving that label correct. I will not support the Australian Labor Party or the Liberal National Party. Vote for the Australian Greens. Story 49. This is impossible to enforce. Even if it were possible, the logical conclusion is that it would be massive government overreach. Story 50. Instead of investing in mental health, they impose an age ban on social media. They have no idea how they will enforce it. Virtual private networks will circumvent the ban. Story 51. I think it's stupid and dangerous, given the fact that everyone in Australia, including adults, will have to verify themselves with digital identification to use social media. I don't want to do that. It's fucking stupid and will just lead to more leaks of personal identification, like Optus and Medicare. But of course, everyone votes for the nanny state treatment. Story 52. Just like banning people under 18 from smoking and drinking alcohol, I am sure it will work just as well. Story 53. I am not Australian, but how will they enforce that without identification? It sounds like an excuse to spy on people. Why should children and teenagers be excluded from the internet simply because the government decides so? I cannot imagine how much worse my life would have been as a child with abusive parents if I had not had access to the internet. Story 54. Zero impact. Most accounts require the user to be 18 or older anyway or have limited child accounts linked to parent accounts. That now makes no difference. In any case, no child is going to give up their social accounts now, so adoption will take a generation. By then, the law will be forgotten and unenforced, as with vaping and helmet rules for scooters. There may be fines for companies that supply access, but that will only mean that when signing up for TikTok, the service will ask if you are over 16. Users will lie and the matter will be done. Since many social platforms are offshore, the law will not apply to them. Also, at 16 years old, you are not considered a responsible adult here, so there is no consequence for lying. There might be a national firewall to block the social apps, but in reality that will not be possible because there are legitimate users over 16. I understand the sentiment. I am a parent with 2 children just past 16, and I believe the solution is educating my generation to instill a healthy distrust of content on social media. After all, it has its place. Story 55. It is easily circumvented, but I do think that social media is not for children. Story 56. The West should follow suit. Good for Australia. Social media is a cancer. Story 57. My problem is that enforcement of this would require everyone using social media to go through an identification process. The last thing I want is for a social media company to have my identification on record, even if they claim they delete it after confirmation. Story 58. Terrible idea. Nothing short of a bubble wrap fix. If you do not teach them, it only delays the inevitable. Story 59. It's alarming that we have already mentally harmed 2 generations of children with this, and it's crazy that it took this long to try to put the toothpaste back in the tube. Story 60. One part of me believes it is great. Some social media is very detrimental, in my opinion. Bullying, body image problems, peer pressure, and so on. I also think of other things. For example, social media is now the main way organizations advertise events and similar activities, such as volunteer opportunities for local animal rescues and local art camps. I also know that my child was managing his volunteer organization's Facebook page at 15, partly because he understood the style that works to get their message out, something he would not have learned if he had not been on social media earlier. There is good content on social media too. I would like to see more rules about algorithms, perhaps content filtered by age. I do not know. I just think algorithms are a bigger problem than access to social media. Story 61. I think it will make already sneaky teenagers even more so. Story 62. Australian here. This law is misguided. Want to protect children from online bullying? Go after the social media networks that do nothing to remove problem users from their platforms. Why punish the children? Story 63. I feel that Australia probably has more important issues to deal with than trying to dictate which apps people can or cannot have on their phones, such as the housing shortage. Story 64. I like it, but I do not believe it will work. Social media, in my humble opinion, is really destroying the social fabric. Story 65. It is fascist rhetoric under the pretense of protecting children. If they cared about children, they would spend funds on improving foster homes, increasing social benefits for families with children, and addressing child trafficking. They do not care about children. They never have and never will. This is a testing ground to see what measures they can impose later to tie up the gears of society. Story 66. Anyone who is in favor of this has no idea of the ramifications. Everyone will have to be personally identified online, and internet anonymity will be gone along with the right to dissent. Australia already sent police to the homes of people during the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic for talking about anti-lockdown measures. What will they do now? This is mass surveillance disguised with the same deception that produced the current state of the Five Eyes Alliance. Story 67. Under the laws, which will not come into force for another 12 months, social media companies could be fined up to $50 million for failing to take reasonable steps to keep users under 16 off their platforms. There are no penalties for young people or parents who flout the rules. Social media companies also will not be able to force users to provide government identification, including digital identification, to assess their age. That means it will not be an overreach, but it will probably lead to little more than an update to the terms of service and possibly the automatic banning of accounts that register as under 16. It will not change anything in effect and is essentially a waste of time. Story 68. I agree with the concept, but enforcing it would require providing every social media platform with more personal information than I am comfortable sharing. Story 69. It is a great idea if a United States ally does it, but wholly draconian if China does it. Story 70. Australia's leading cause of death among teenagers is suicide, so it is not a bad policy, although it remains controversial. What is hypocritical is the government's refusal to stop gambling ads that run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, or even to address the housing crisis. Story 71. After reading the full text of the act, I am confused. There are no clear details about what is considered social media or how platforms must verify users' ages. Story 72. Imagine enforcing speed limits without radar guns, where police must assume you are driving the speed you claim. The only time anyone is caught is when an accident is caused by obvious speeding. I think the same will happen with this law. Responsible parents will enforce it. Unsupervised children will ignore it. No one will be punished until something goes very badly online. When children are bullied online into taking their own lives, authorities will have an easier time bringing charges, but otherwise the law will be empty. Story 73. It is interesting to consider what this will do to advertising. Children will find ways to circumvent it, but there is strong potential to force platforms to divest from advertising that targets them, which would be a significant benefit. Will any of this go anywhere? It is doubtful but possible. Story 74. What does this mean? Does it mean they cannot have an account to comment or post on social media, or that they will be unable to access any content? If it is the latter, I think that is bad, because being able to access content from an early age benefited me and taught me a lot that I would not have been able to learn at school. Story 75. It is impossible to enforce and a waste of political capital when we have urgent problems to address. It is a ridiculous priority, both in terms of what truly matters and tactically for Labor's efforts to win the next election. Story 76. Some workarounds will be found, and parents will be complicit in helping their children circumvent the rules, even if they support the ban in general. When the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act went into effect in the United States, the biggest measurable effect was parents teaching their children that it was acceptable to lie about their age on online forums. Story 77. My problem with this is that our society has become heavily intertwined with social media, so blocking people under 16 from using it is like excluding them from a large part of society. Look at Reddit. It is a valuable learning resource and a place to get help with technical problems. Are you going to remove that for them with no alternative simply because society has moved on? Story 78. Pointless. Reddit is full of users who are not supposed to be here. Nothing will change. Tomorrow everyone will create new accounts on every platform claiming to be 18 or older. Story 79. No, I think the risks of social media should be taught instead. Story 80. It would not be fair to the kids. How will they communicate online with their friends? Snapchat and WhatsApp are the most used, I assume. Story 81. As usual, this will cause people to create a secondary market where things will become strange and unregulated. Story 82. Ancient, thumb, cheerful, mountainous, ask, plant, violet, vase, provide, and consider. Story 83. Doomed to fail. You cannot put the toothpaste back in the tube. Story 84. This seems like a bad idea. It is not only a breach of privacy and a risk to identification, but the age of 16 seems excessive and overly controlling, given that it is an age when people can move out or drink. I personally think 14 would be more appropriate. Many applications say they are for users aged 13 and older but have no way of enforcing this, so at least genuinely requiring users to be 13 and older would be a good start. Story 85. Banning children under 16 from social media is like finally teaching wolves to wear leashes. It is a step toward adult wisdom as we combat waves of disinformation that sneak in occasionally. Teens may grumble now, but in a decade they will thank us from behind the memes for helping them reclaim authenticity. Instead of projecting a curated identity online, would it not be glorious if they found the roots of real connection first? It is okay to be a little inconvenient, especially when the journey to understanding ourselves and each other truly begins offline. Story 86. I think it's great. Kids should be working during the day and studying the Bible at night. We didn't have the internet when I was a kid. That was back when we raised men, though. Not today's little Nancy boys. Hubert Hill. Story 87. Tired of hearing about American politics from 16-year-old Australians? This will provide a little peace and quiet. Story 88. As someone who had social media from a young age, I wish it had been banned until I was 16. That was before it became deliberately addictive. My brain was fried, and all I did was use MySpace and Facebook. I can't even imagine what it is doing now. Story 89. We should ban the whole damn thing for people of all ages. Story 90. Social media access should be restricted until age 18 to keep harmful content away. Story 91. One step toward a brighter future. Now for the rest of the world. Story 92. I think social media is a blight on our existence. I hate that children today will never know a world without it. They will not know afternoons spent playing in the street, riding bicycles, or playing marbles with their friends. My childhood felt simpler than theirs will ever be. We never heard of children taking their own lives because of relentless bullying around the clock. I think it is a positive step, but one taken too late. I hope they find an effective way to enforce it. Story 93. I think we should raise the minimum age for social media worldwide. If you are under 70, no social media. Life was better without all this bullshit. Yes, I know I can quit, but that does not mean everyone else will suddenly stop being glued to their phone. Real human connection is being lost. Story 94. This is a massive win and should be applied everywhere. It will, however, be hard to enforce without complete cooperation from the social media companies. I expect it will be like the "Are you over 18, yes or no" prompt we already have, so not very effective. Story 95. I am Australian. I have a little girl who is 2 years old and nieces aged 10 to 15. I am so glad this law passed for her sake. The effect it seems to have on children today is awful, even as a distraction at school. I hope it can be properly implemented and enforced, as we have not been informed how enforcement will occur. Story 96. It is a step in the right direction. As many have said in this thread, children will find ways to access social media, but restricting access creates the perception that social media is not appropriate for all audiences. That is true for many reasons, although many people do not perceive it that way, perhaps because they joined social media when it was an appropriate medium for all audiences. When social media began, it was used primarily by individuals engaging with people in their personal social circles. Now politicians, entrepreneurs, and large technology companies are in the fold and have begun using social media platforms to generate propaganda, spread misinformation, and create echo chambers, gaining influence in social, political, and cultural affairs. Many people do not understand that when they log in, they are not just engaging with friends as in the old Facebook days. Algorithms from large technology companies feed information or misinformation and push content into users' feeds for business, political, or other ends. People underestimate how much of their worldview is shaped by this content. In addition, large technology companies are gathering and selling our data and developing new ways to manipulate people. And there are very few laws in the United States addressing this directly. Propaganda, misinformation, and echo chambers influence how people think and behave, and the way children think and behave can affect their development. Children will probably still be able to access social media, but this law can have other effects. People should understand that social media use can be dangerous for immature audiences. If this policy reframes the general population's attitudes towards social media, so we begin engaging with it in a healthier way, it is a worthwhile law to have even if it does not fully achieve its intended effect. Story 97. They are extremely progressive in this act, following the science that says this is harmful to young, developing brains. Good for them. Story 98. It is completely unenforceable, and you will be paying more taxes. Story 99. A 12-year-old is going to breach government servers and lock them out to teach them a lesson. He will probably loop his best Minecraft video on all their screens, too. Story 100. I am a therapist who primarily worked with adolescents. It was sad to see how deeply affected they were by social media. Many experienced anxiety, depression, and suicidal thoughts that stemmed mainly from events on social platforms, and Snapchat had the worst impact. Story 101. Good. This is the best thing I have read on the internet in a while. Story 102. It sounds like a well-intentioned idea, but I do not see how it could be enforced without a radical system that prevents internet access unless a person provides government-issued identification to verify their identity, which would open a far bigger Pandora's box of issues. What would prevent a child from using a virtual private network, which influencers often advertise, or from lying about their identity? It sounds like parental control software that was allegedly relatively easy to uninstall or bypass in the past. Story 103. I appreciate the debate many people are having about digital identification, but I remember proof of age cards. Story 104. I have read that every user will have to verify their age across a broad range of websites and apps, including Reddit. That makes me question whether I even want to use these services, because I do not get much out of them, especially Facebook. I would not delete my account. I would simply stop using it, since it would not be worth the hassle. Story 105. Unrestricted internet access is one of the most harmful things for children that we accept. It is not a bad idea. It just will not work. Story 106. I am in Australia and a parent of 3 children aged 9 to 17. I think it is utterly ridiculous. It is completely unenforceable, will make imposing parental controls even harder, and is frankly insulting given the cost of living crisis. If the government wants to rush legislation, how about addressing housing affordability, corporate taxation, or the rorting of our supermarket duopoly? They are craven wankers. Story 107. Australia's proposed social media ban for children under 16 years old aims to protect them from risks such as cyberbullying and data misuse. While well-intentioned, the policy may limit children's social connections and access to information and raises concerns about privacy and enforceability. Story 108. We are now moving to Australia to make a point to my 12-year-old. Or should this comment be posted to the Petty Revenge subreddit? Story 109. Parents should keep their children off social media, regardless. Story 110. I think the concept is good. My kids weren't allowed on it until they were 16 anyway, but I don't know how they are going to enforce it. Story 111. The minimum age for all social media should be 21. 16 is too young to be exposed to such harmful influences. I know many people in their 30s who can barely cope with this addiction. Social media should be regulated in the same way as drugs, alcohol, and tobacco. Story 112. I plan on limiting my children's access to the internet, but that's a personal choice. I would never ask the government to enforce that on everyone around me. Luckily, I live in a country where freedom rings. Story 113. People say it's impossible to enforce this, but China enforces video game restrictions without issues. In China, you must provide government-issued identification to download a game. Although this can be bypassed using a virtual private network, I have learned recently that doing so is very risky. Story 114. I would rather see an outright ban on children under 16, but whatever. Story 115. What about the backdoor to government control rather than parental control? You will all have to prove you are over the age of 16. Fools. Story 116. Do you have to hand over your identification to social media platforms to sign up or keep your account? Hell no. Story 117. There should be a ban on social media for anyone under the age of 18. Story 118. As a retired media studies teacher, I would be glad to see children kept off social media until they are older. The misinformation and lies they repeat in the classroom can often be traced back to what they read online. I have had students submit work containing passages copied verbatim from Wikipedia and other non-authoritative sites that they were clearly instructed to avoid when doing research at home. If parents became more aware and involved, we would have a better chance of reversing some of these harmful trends. Story 119. Good intentions, but there is no way to enforce them without requiring submission of some form of government-issued identification. Story 120. What could possibly go wrong with every minor in Australia having to upload identification to multiple social media sites where their personal information could be hacked and exploited? Story 121. It is concerning. Multiple studies showed that during the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic rates of anorexia nervosa among girls, including adolescents and children, increased and remained high. Increased social media use contributed to this trend. Children as young as 7 were reported to restrict their food intake after viewing content on TikTok. Among boys and teenage males, exposure to misogynistic material and content promoting toxic masculinity was linked to increased aggression and gang-related violence. Parents should monitor their children's online behavior because they may not know what their children are viewing or how it affects them. There was a widely reported case of a 12-year-old girl in Australia who died by suicide following bullying. Studies also show higher rates of depression and suicidal ideation among social media users. I would be happy to provide references to the studies I mentioned upon request. Story 122. As someone who was on the internet before I was 16, I think this is a great idea. The internet has affected me greatly, and I would have preferred not to have access until I understood things better. Story 123. As an Australian parent of a teenager and someone who voted for the current government, I think it is fucking stupid. They have tried to push this through way too quickly, and I guarantee there will be issues. We are going through a major cost of living and housing crisis. How about putting some effort into fixing the biggest problems facing our nation instead of this ban no one asked for? Story 124. This is extremely progressive and necessary. As a teacher, I find social media to be one of the main distractions for children at school. Large numbers of Generation Z and Generation Alpha young people will experience severe mental health issues related to social media. Story 125. As a law, it is unenforceable. However, it can become a cultural norm. Much like preventing children from smoking, we can ensure children are kept offline. Would you let a child smoke a cigarette if you saw it? No. So why let them use the internet? Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.